Audiobook Academy. Book Summary. Love in the Time of Cholera. By Gabriel Garcia Marquez. A love story, Love in the Time of Cholera was published in 1988. It takes place in the city of Viceroys, which is likely to be in or around Cartagena, based on descriptions. Between the years of 1880 and 1930, the tale takes place. One day, Florentino Ariza, a young guy well liked by the ladies and employed as a postal delivery boy, happens to run across the stunning Fermina Daza. He falls head over heels for her right away and doesn't stop thinking about her. They write each other love letters until her father discovers them and takes her away from them. He brings her back to his house, believing that she has put an end to their amorous feelings. She resolves to break up with Florentino the first time she sees him. She marries a doctor, and he continues to love her through his encounters with other women. At her husband's burial, 51 years, 9 months, and 4 days after they broke up, he confesses his love for her. Fermina and Florentino rekindle their correspondence despite the fact that Fermina is still mourning the loss of her husband. They rediscover their former passions, albeit in much older bodies when he visits. A cruise with him is in the cards, and he manages to persuade her to join him. The captain has the ship's flag flown with a cholera warning when they arrive at a port because she is afraid of being found out by the locals that she is seeing a man. This novel features an extra character, Cholera. It is discussed frequently throughout the course of the novel. At its core, it is a story that follows the lives of its protagonists and ultimately leaves them alone. Gabriel Garcia Marquez's Love in the Time of Cholera opens with an ending. Suicide victims report seeing Dr. Juvenal Urbino del Calle as soon as they arrive on the site. Chess player Jeremiah de Saint Armor has poisoned himself and his dog to death in order to get revenge on his friend. However, Dr. Urbino believes that the death was not accidental, despite the police inspector's doubts. His companion was a photographer, so he wouldn't have made a mistake when it came to chemicals. Dr. Urbino, a creature of routine, was making his regular rounds when he came across a message on the door of Saint Armor. The note instructed the recipient to come in without knocking and alert the police. He and the forensics trainee Dr. Urbino, were now standing together with the police inspector. It occurs to Dr. Urbino that his companion would have lost in just 4 moves if they had looked at a chessboard. As the inspector ponders the suicide of his comrade, he comes across a note addressed to Dr. Urbino. While reading, his expression shifts. Saint Armor's final instructions are included in an 11-page letter that is tucked into his pocket. Because he pointed them to a stray floor towel where a safe was tucked away, they trusted him. For the funeral and other costs, there was just enough money. Dr. Urbino, who never misses Mass, has decided to let the Caribbean migrants that Saint Armor aided know of his death, despite the fact that he would be attending Mass. In reality, what he truly wants to do is inform his wife of the letter. Dr. Urbino receives the letter instructing him to visit an unfamiliar area. It's located in the town's former slave quarters, which are now a museum. The door is answered by an elderly woman. She has a rose tucked behind her ear and a black outfit. Upon further investigation, Dr. Urbino determines that the woman was Saint Longtime Armor's girlfriend. Saint Armor's deformity would have rendered that impossible, therefore Urbino was startled to read it in the letter. His legs were useless and he always used crutches to walk around. That's why his neighbors didn't know that his housekeeper was also his sweetheart. Saint Armor urged her to wear a rose as a reminder of him, and she obliged. Additionally, she revealed to Urbino that he had always intended to commit suicide once he turned 60. Growing older was the last thing he wanted to do. That night, Urbino wrote a letter to Saint Armor because she had been with him. The other chess player was her. She vowed to her lover that she would get up and do something productive the next day instead of lying in bed crying. She plans to get rid of his belongings and live there for the rest of her days. If you're Dr. Urbino, you'll find the servants chasing after your pet parrot as soon as you get home. The parrot is being tutored by Urbino in French. Using calming phrases in French, Spanish, and Latin, he tried to coax the parrot down from the mango tree, but to no avail. Because he has taught us to speak fluent French and to recite Bible scriptures, the bird has become a local celebrity. In addition, he taught it how to perform basic mathematical operations. For the past 20 years, he has given the parrot far more care than he has provided to his wife and kids. Everyone, including the President of the United States, comes to see the bird perform. Aside from these 2 hours, though, there is nothing further that can be done about it. Fermina, his wife, had tried to warn him of this. She had a zoo full of pets when they were first married since she liked animals so much. One day, however, One of their dogs had rabies, and all of the animals had to be put down, save for a tortoise, which they managed to forget a great deal on a regular basis. Urbino had made it clear that no new pets could enter the compound if they couldn't communicate verbally. So, his wife brought the parrot back to the house. When some intruders broke into the house, it barked like a dog and screamed to scare them away. Thieves need to be put out of their misery. Dr. Urbino began teaching the bird new words after that. As a result, the servants are attempting to lure it down from the mango tree. It escaped after they opened the cage to clip its wings. Dr. Urbino, the president of the local fire department, calls them to remove the bird. In order to find his wife, he enters. Even at the age of 72, Fermina is stunning. A few weeks ago, they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary. In spite of the fact that she has been observing her spouse's deteriorating mental and physical abilities, she does not believe that her husband is growing older. They were still ironing out the kinks after 30 years of marriage. When he woke up in the morning, they would argue. Urbino awoke his wife at the crack of morning by waking her up. While pretending asleep, she would berate him for waking her up. The whole thing exploded on its own one day. He was upset because she was supposed to have replaced the soap in the bathroom, and he brought it up to her in her complaint. She insisted that there was soap in the bathroom. He bursts out of the hospital and refuses to return home until she acknowledges there was no soap. Finally, he recommends that they both confess, even if it had to be in front of the Archbishop of Canterbury. She refuses and threatens to return to her father's house. Seeing her sincerity, he offers to make a small concession. Even if he won't acknowledge there was soap in the room, he will return to his parents' house and sleep in a different room. Nevertheless, after 4 months, he misses his feather bed and agrees that there was soap in the bathroom sink. In 50 years, they'd only engaged in one significant fight. Fermina tucks the letter Saint Armor penned into a drawer when Urbino hands it to her, but she doesn't read it. It said that if her spouse were to die, she'd behave in the same manner as his ex-girlfriend. Rather, Urbino's thoughts are focused on how enraged he is at his friend for suppressing the information that he had been sentenced to life in prison for a heinous, but unidentified crime. Later that night, Dr. Urbino and his wife will attend a colleague's 25th wedding anniversary party. He spots the young doctor from the forensics of Saint Armor that day. Dr. Urbino's response to the Archbishop's question about Saint Demise Armors is geronophobia, or a fear of getting older. Dr. Marquez Urbino, the Urbino family's eldest son, arrives with his wife and dessert soon after. For being late, he apologizes. Because the fire department was present, someone must have informed him that his father's house was on fire. Fermina and Urbino find a total mess when they get home. Even after destroying the building, the fire crew was unable to capture the bird. The doctor hears a bird in a mango tree while taking a brief break and reflecting about the onset of old age. Whenever he gets close, the bird takes an airborne leap to a higher branch. There is a ladder for Urbino. As soon as a servant enters the room and spots the elderly man on the ladder, she screams in fear. The ladder gives way just as he gets close to the bird, and he plummets to his death. After hearing the servant's screams, his wife went into the house. "Only God knows how much I love you," he confesses to her. His death has shocked the city, and 3 days of mourning have been set aside to honor his memory. Fermina has remained stoic despite his fears after his death. Only her closest family and friends are invited to her 3-day private vigil. This is how she tells him they'll be back together someday. She softly removes her wedding ring and places it in his hand. When Fermina doesn't identify Florentino Ariza as the president of the River Company of the Caribbean at the wake, he is hurt. He's already planned the event and even managed to capture the parrot. At the age of 76, he spends a lot of time donning black clothes in an attempt to mask his appearance. Finally noticing Florentino after everyone has gone, she beams with joy. His name had slipped her mind. To prove his undying love for her, he stays behind and renews a commitment he made 50 years ago to never leave her. She gets enraged and evicts him from her home, threatening to never allow him back in again. Afterwards, she sobs herself to sleep, only to discover the next day that the majority of her sobs were shed in memory of Florentino. Florentino, despite Fermina's claims to the contrary, is still haunted by their adolescent romance. When Florentino's father died, Florentino had to start working at the age of 10. Florentino's mother's casual partner fathered him without his consent. Florentino begins working at the post office, where he meets an elderly German man who begins teaching him the violin and Morse code. As a result of these talents, he's become a favorite among the female students. Until he sees Fermina, Florentino enjoys playing the field. Seeing her teaching her aunt to read, his father becomes smitten with her. He sits on a bench every day pretending to read as she and her aunt stroll by. During his adolescence, he writes Fermina a 76-page letter, but he is unable to deliver it to her because of her aunt's opposition. First, he should make friends with the aunt and then delete the letter, according to his mother's advice. Fermina secretly hopes he'll write her a letter, but neither of them realize it. From the park seat, he's been staring at her for years, but he's frightened to approach her. To his surprise and delight, she says she'll write him back. First she needs to ask her father, but he'll let her know he's ready to deliver her his letter when he spots her sitting in a different chair. Soon, but it's not the lengthy letter he wrote, instead, it's a simple message promising his undying love and dedication to her. In his impatience to hear back from her, Florentino gets sick and tired of sitting around. His patience has run out. He finally makes his way to her residence. He's been on her mind, too, but she hasn't been able to respond to his love letter. When school lets out for the summer, she says she'll get back to him with an answer. After she responds, the two youngsters continue to correspond through letter for the next year without ever meeting in person. His letters are expressions of love, while hers chronicle her day's events. Her aunt, despite the fact that she knows her father would not be pleased, continues to write to her niece. Fermina hears a violin outside her window one night. It keeps repeating the same waltz. Florentino is playing a song he wrote for her, Crowned Goddess, and she recognizes him. She can hear the music without anyone knowing it's for her, so they make plans for him to perform at other venues. As soon as the authorities believe his music contains hidden signals, he will be detained on suspicion of being a spy. He feels he's a martyr for love after spending 3 nights in jail. For the past 2 years, Florentino has been exchanging letters with her. It's not clear to Fermina. She requests some further time to consider the situation. Her aunt assures her that if she doesn't accept, she'll regret it later. If he doesn't force her to consume eggplant, she finally agrees. As long as they keep their engagement a secret, Florentino's mother is on board with the marriage. Moreover, they must investigate her father's background. They're all on the same page. Florentino keeps working at the post office while Fermina returns to the convent and school. As a result, Florentino has been given a free room by his former boss. While staying at the hotel, Florentino rebuffs the advances of prostitutes and other female guests. For Fermina, he's keeping his virginity. They keep writing to one another, and eventually the Mother Superior comes upon one of their letters. Expulsion occurs when Fermina refuses to reveal the identity of her hidden boyfriend. Her father is beyond upset. He goes through her things, discovers the letters, and returns her aunt to her home country. Fermina is refusing to eat and has locked herself in her room in protest. In order to get her father to back down, she holds a knife to her throat. Florentino is confronted by Fermina's father, who threatens to shoot him if he doesn't stop visiting her. Florentino tells him that he would die for him. So, in an effort to help her forget about Florentino, her father sends her off on an extended vacation. Until Fermina realizes that Florentino has been sending her telegrams, she is utterly depressed. After that, they continue to talk. Her father drives her back to her house, believing she is finally over Florentino. Florentino is awed by her maturity when he first sees her. Fermina, now 17, is in charge of the household. Her intention was to buy ink so she could write him, but when she sees him, she is disgusted. She decides to quit their relationship and move on with her life. Florentino receives a letter from her informing him that she has come to the realization that their love isn't true and that she would be forwarding him all of Florentino's correspondence going forward. He is inconsolable. Despite his mother's repeated requests, she would not allow him to see her until 50 years after his husband's death, when she finally agreed to see him. Fermina's husband, Dr. Juvenal Urbino del Calle, is now the focus of our attention. When they first meet, he is the town's most eligible bachelor, age 28. He had recently returned from Paris, where he witnessed the devastation wrought by the cholera epidemic. With the loss of his father, the sickness has now claimed a member of his own family. A doctor and civic leader in the same vein as his father, Urbino works to end the disease by advocating for better sanitary standards in public places. When Fermina's father is asked to conduct a cholera examination, he tries to play matchmaker. He returns the following day to see how she's doing, and she's unpleasant to him. Urbino is invited to coffee and a drink at her father's house because he wants she apologize. Although he never touches them, he accepts and gets a little tipsy as a result. She tells him that because of his carelessness, one of his patients had to be hospitalized and died. Urbino continues to seek Fermina, but she continues to be cold to him because her father supports the match and she opposes it. Still, he comes back, and her father begins teaching him chess, sparking a lifelong fascination. Urbino ultimately gets Fermina's permission to speak to her father about marriage despite the fact that she toys with his loves a lot. Florentino tries again after knowing about her impending marriage. He plays the violin and sings to her a song that he created for her. He goes and she doesn't acknowledge him, and his mother helps him find work at a distant telegraph office. He gets lured by an older woman on the ship that brings him to his new life. Florentino returns home to find out that Fermina and her new husband had already left for their honeymoon, having been devastated by Florentino's decision to take the job because of Fermina. She wants him to have a romance with a young widow, so she asks her to stay in his room when her house is destroyed. But she seduces him, and he ends up sleeping on the floor instead. Their relationship lasts for a few months, but she eventually leaves him and thanks him for turning her into a whore. Florentino believes that having a lot of affairs is the best method to deal with the pain of a broken heart. In the course of 50 years, he's had 622 significant relationships, filling notebooks with details. But even with an abundance of ladies at hand, he still has a soft spot in his heart for Fermina, who returns 6 months pregnant and much more stunning than before. He swears to earn her trust and wait for her husband's demise before he does anything else. Fermina had high hopes for marriage, but she was disappointed when it turned out differently than she expected. She is frightened of getting pregnant because she fears losing her virginity, but then she wonders why it is taking her so long. As a result, she begins to believe that she has all she needs. Fermina was not the reason for Urbino's marriage to Urbino. In her arrogant style, he found himself attracted to her. However, he hopes that he would eventually fall in love with her. To help support his family, Florentino obtains a job working for his uncle's business. In the meantime, he makes a living as a poet. There have been affairs with a number of women in his past because of his passionate nature. His free-flying birds are also mentioned in detail in the book. Fermina, on the other hand, is displeased. She had no choice but to live in the house of a woman who cooks only eggplant because her husband doesn't love her. She also wants Fermina to learn how to play the harp, which she says she'll make sure she does. Fermina's father's unscrupulous business operations come to light, but Urbino uses his clout to put an end to the rumors and expel him. While on vacation with his wife and baby, he attempts to save his marriage. When Florentino begins an affair with a young married woman, her husband kills her. Soon after his mother's death, she is buried in the same cemetery as the married woman she had previously met. Roses sprout from Florentino's efforts to decorate their final resting places. The Cemetery of Roses is the new moniker for the grounds. Florentino has resumed his surveillance of Fermina, who has fled to the countryside to live with her cousin after learning of her husband's extramarital affair. In the end, Urbino breaks up with his girlfriend and brings her home. Even if they aren't exactly thrilled with their relationship, they are still married and going strong. Florentino is having an affair with a 14-year-old girl when he learns of Urbino's death. He dashes to be by Fermina's side, and we're right back where we were. 2 weeks of waiting for an answer from Fermina have finally paid off. He found her handwritten message in the rain at his front door. It's a stoic response from Florentino to the angry letter. Letters are once again exchanged between the two of them, but this time they're only about the day's events. He tells his 14-year-old sweetheart he plans to marry her and ends their relationship. Angrily telling him that old people do not marry, she storms off. Asked about him by her friend, Fermina learned that he is never seen with a woman, so everyone believes he picks up lides on the docks. After corresponding for a year, he decides to pay a weekly visit to her residence after 2 weeks without writing. On the other hand, Florentino's daughter is not amused by Fermina's son's appreciation of Florentino as a companion. As a result, she instructs her daughter to leave the house immediately. An ankle injury results from a slip and fall by Florentine. Florentino convinces Fermina to join him on a cruise once he's feeling better. Her memories of her husband are finally put to rest while they are there. The 14-year-old girl committed suicide, according to a message Florentine receives. Finally, Florentino and Fermina have been together for 50 years. People she recognizes are getting ready to board the boat as the boat approaches the coast and she worries about the scandal. For the sake of safety, Florentino orders the captain to turn away all awaiting passengers. So, he erects a cholera quarantine flag on the boat. There are just Florentino and Fermina left on the ship, which is drifting aimlessly down the river. Florentino Ariza, one of the three main characters of the story. After the death of his biological father, he is forced to leave school at the age of 10 because his father had little interest in him other than financial. As a delivery boy for a post office, he gets his first job. He becomes smitten with Fermina Daza after spotting her while making a delivery. For the most of the book, he stalks her, occasionally exchanging love letters with her. Despite the lack of hope, Florentino enjoys the romance and creates romantic poems. To ensure that he is ready for Fermina when she is free, he devotes his time and resources to developing his money and social standing. Until then, he had 622 love affairs, not including his numerous liaisons, but he always has his heart set on Fermina. At first, he's willing to sacrifice his life for the sake of love, but as he gets older, he's terrified of dying and getting old. He recognizes Fermina's age when he finally gets to spend time with her, yet he continues to date her. Fermina Daza, the female lead of this story. I think she's a gorgeous woman, but she's also arrogant. After her mother's death, she was raised by her father and has a stubborn and spoiled personality. As an adolescent, she is prone to emotional outbursts and acts out. To keep the romance at bay, she responds to Florentino's passionate letters with mundane events. A convent school and the way she thinks about the church officials causes her to turn away from the church, especially when the nuns discover her love letters and tell her father. He tells her he can't see Florentino, so she has to get him for her. As a result of Florentino's chilly rejection, her father urges her to meet and fall in love with a wealthy doctor. She weds him, but she is never happy in the relationship. They are married for 50 years until he passes away. Florentino is the man she finally settles down with. Dr. Juvenal Urbino del Calle. Urbino is a well-respected doctor who comes from a line of well-respected doctors. He's a throwback who conducts house calls in a buggy because that's what he does. When he is young and single, he has many of options for a partner, so he chooses Fermina as his wife. The frigid, haughty demeanor of hers attracts him despite his lack of love for her. On a daily basis, he looks forward to the same thing happening in his life. He rises at dawn, conducts his rounds, eats lunch at home, and takes a siesta. After that, he read for an hour and a half and tutored his parrot in French. In the afternoons, he would leave the house at 4 p.m. to visit his patients. Before going to sleep, he would read a book. Only his family holidays and a brief love affair in his middle age did he depart from his strict schedule. He was haunted with guilt as a devout Catholic. However, he was able to end the conflict and repair his marriage. He falls to his death after climbing a ladder to save his parrot from a tree. His final words are to his wife, in which he expresses his love and devotion to her. Born in Aracataca, Colombia, in 1927, Gabriel José de la Concordia Garcia Marquez is a Colombian author, screenwriter, journalist, and Latin American hero. Many consider Marquez to be one of the most important 20th-century Spanish-language novelists. The Nobel Prize in Literature in 1982 was the most prestigious honor he won throughout his lifetime. A pharmacist's son, Marquez was raised by his grandparents from an early age before attending law school at the National University of Colombia, where he also began writing for the newspaper there. The El Universal in Cartagena and then the El Heraldo in Barranquilla were where Marquez got his money as a journalist throughout the late 1940s and early 1950s. It was during this time that Marquez, known for his liberalism, helped with the coup d'état of the Venezuelan president Marcos Pérez Jiménez. Marquez and Mercedes Barca were married in 1958 and had 2 kids shortly thereafter. It was for his debut work, 100 Years of Solitude, published in 1967, that he won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1982. As one of the finest classic books of the 20th century, it has remained popular for decades. Marquez spent several years in Spain following the publication of the novel. The Colombian government and the country's urban guerrillas were negotiating with him during this period. Fidel Castro, the former Cuban president, was one of several foreign leaders who became friends with Marquez because of his fame. For many years, Marquez was denied admission into the United States because of his well-known opinions on American imperialism. The Autumn of the Patriarch, Chronicle of Death Foretold, and Love in the Time of Cholera are just a few of Marquez's best-known works, 1985. In Latin America, many of Marquez's screenplays were adapted into films. From April 2014 until his death from pneumonia in April of that year, he continued to write and be a well-known national personality. In honor of Marquez's life, a memorial service was performed a few days after his cremation. The presidents of Colombia and Mexico City were in attendance. Residents of Aracataca, where he grew up, also organized a memorial service. Thank you for listening in Audiobook Academy. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button for more content like this. See you in next video.